It was a heist of presidential proportions, a 45-year-old mystery. Millions of dollars worth of precious gems, diamonds, and jewels, encrusted into 3 large swords and 2 daggers, were stolen from the Harry Truman Presidential Library, and in just under 45 seconds. Authorities described it as a highly planned and orchestrated theft, and it's still unsolved to this day. Who stole the jeweled Saudi swords from the Truman Museum? And where are they now? It was an early spring morning. The light of the sun was only just starting to brighten the skies, and a light snow was falling. It was Friday, March 24th, 1978. The first alarm was triggered at 6:28 a.m. A group of thieves were breaking into the Truman Library foyer by smashing a 2-by-4-foot glass window at the grand main entrance. They would have had to bend over to enter through the jagged glass hole before standing tall and striding into the large lobby. The second alarm triggered when the glass on a sizable display case was broken. This display case housed a 7-piece collection of ceremonial swords and daggers. All were decorated lavishly with numerous precious stones that would be valued in the millions of dollars today. Within seconds, the thieves nabbed and left with 5 of the 7 weapons. One sword and scabbard hosted 84 rubies and more than 1,000 pearls. Another included a 7-carat diamond. This one stone alone had an estimated value of $200,000 when it was stolen back in 1978, and today its value would be close to $1 million. In the end, it would be determined that within the intricate and ornate designs on the weapons, 139 diamonds in total were missing, and police estimated that it was all over in less than a minute. The gems and swords had been on display at the library entrance for 20 years. They were gifts to the United States, and they've been stolen from the United States, current museum curator Clay Bosky said. The first sword had been a gift to President Truman from the Shah of Iran. He had visited the United States and gifted the bejeweled weapon to the president in 1947. Then, Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Amir Saud presented 2 swords and a dagger to President Truman during his tour of the United States in 1948. Several years later, as a personal thanks, the Saudi Arabian king himself had sent the president a dagger. The king had fallen very ill, and when the president learned of his condition, he had stepped in to help. Clay Bosky, museum curator, said Truman had sent his personal doctor, Wallace Graham, to Saudi Arabia to treat the king, and in gratitude, he gave Truman that last dagger. Each of the royal weapons were intricate, ornate, and bejeweled, fit for presidents, princes, and kings. It would have been hard to assign a true value to their worth, given the history behind them. However, back in 1959, the 4 Saudi gifts had been appraised at $90,000. By the time they were taken in 1978, authorities estimated that they were worth at least 4 times that. The whole lot taken valued somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. And now they were all gone. The first suspicious sign that morning had been a late-model Oldsmobile parked at the rear of the library. The guard station was near the back, and overnight guard Thomas W. Williams noticed a man or woman get out of the vehicle. It was Thomas's first week on the job, and he watched intently as the person walked around the car in the snow before getting back in and driving away. Just a few minutes later, the library's mechanic, Neil Morris, arrived, early for his 7 a.m. shift that day. He had just entered the building when the first alarm went off. A bright indicator light at the guard station showed that a break-in was occurring at the front entrance, the one furthest from the guard station. Both Thomas and Neil proceeded down the long corridor from the north end of the library to the south end, towards that front entry. They heard the double doors to the lobby slam shut, and then glass crash as they rushed down the hall. Next, they heard a chain rattle as it was threaded through the double door handles, closing them out of the area where the robbery was taking place. The guard shouted through the door at the thieves, and then, in accordance with his training, Thomas returned to the guard station and phoned police. But the thieves had been so quick that they were already out of the building by the time authorities received the call. When police arrived, they found 2 sets of footprints leading away from the entrance. Unfortunately, they were unable to follow any path left by the burglars. Sergeant Al Heinen of the Independence Police Department told reporters that traffic through the front drive had destroyed the evidence. Investigators on the scene also found a mess in the foyer, broken glass everywhere, but no fingerprints. No evidence of the thieves' identities could be found. It had been fast, it had been anonymous, and it had been successful, but the break-in had not been flawless. In the speed and excitement of the event, the thieves had not actually locked the guards out of the foyer when they had threaded that chain through the double door handles. The number 1 master lock padlock on the 4-foot chain had been closed shut before it was hooked through a second link, and it hung ineffectively attached to just one end of the chain, leaving the entrance to the lobby unlocked. Otherwise, it appeared that the thieves had executed a well-planned and likely rehearsed heist. Sergeant Heinen said, "It has the appearance of being a simple smash and dash. It's not." Investigators believed that the person in the Oldsmobile was not only a planned distraction, but also the getaway driver. This is a photo of the drive, back at the time of the heist, showing where the Oldsmobile was parked. The library's location and easy access to Highway 24 would have provided a quick escape route. Somehow, the thieves had additionally avoided the cameras in the library parking lot. James Fuchs, the chief of oral history projects, was the next library employee to arrive, and he was able to confirm via inventory documentation with police what had been taken. Investigators did not believe that it had been a crime of opportunity. In fact, the timing was interesting. Not only was it the guards' first week at the Harry Truman Library, but library director Dr. Benedict Zobrist was also out of town on vacation when the theft occurred. Thomas, the guard, was cleared of suspicions. He had followed directions to not confront the thieves, and while he had been new to this location, he had worked as a guard for the federal government for several years in Kansas City. Additionally, there had also been a previous failed break-in attempt just 7 weeks prior, on February 3rd. It had been another cold, early Friday morning when a guard walking the perimeter of the exterior had overheard a walkie-talkie and discovered a man drilling into the lock in the front door. This man was described as being between 20 and 30 years old and of medium height and build. He fled as soon as the guard shouted at him and escaped quickly, discarding a Black & Decker portable drill in the bushes. Even with this found evidence and the eyewitness account from the guard that day, a suspect could not be identified. Investigators linked these 2 separate events more than a month and a half apart, but believed them to be committed not by locals, but by outside professionals. Heinen said they were definitely after those items. More than likely, they had a contract. They knew when they took the items who would be buying them. The exotic and unique weapons would have been otherwise hard to sell. Had they been sold to a wealthy collector or melted down for the stones? The library put up a $5,000 reward for information, a hefty amount in 1978, and local investigators turned up no information on the street. no one talking, bragging, or taking credit for the crime, which led more credence to the theory that it had been a professionally contracted heist, someone who knew how to keep their mouths shut. Investigators looked at other gem and sword heists for more clues. Just a few months before, on January 17, 1978, thieves had broken into a home in Maryland and made out with $1.7 million worth of antiques and samurai swords. Then, two men posing as law enforcement had gained entry to an apartment in Manhattan and left with another samurai sword collection. These two sword heists were thought to be related to each other. Were they also related to this Midwest Missouri mystery? Local independence police, the FBI, and the Federal Protective Services were involved in the investigation. They brought in books of mugshots to show library staff. The thieves had surely staked out the location repeatedly in order to plan the heist, but no one stood out. The padlock, prematurely locked, was the only argument against professional thieves. What a mistake that had been, though it had not stopped the robbery from being successful. Also, that number 1 master lock was believed to be purchased at a local hardware store. If it had been a professional job, the thieves had spent a significant amount of time in the area preparing. The previous break-in attempt had been 7 weeks beforehand. Where had the thieves been staying? How had they gone unnoticed? Other questions persisted. Why had just 5 of the 7 display weapons been taken? Had they been unable to hold more? Had it been about the items themselves? They had been gifts from the Middle East, mostly Saudi swords. Some speculated that the thieves had been upset about foreign politics, perhaps about Saudi Arabia's place in the UN, or the president's friendly disposition with the royal family. Critics of the U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia called out their opposition to democracy, freedom of religion, and their treatment of women. In the 1970s, the Saudi government had led the Arab boycott of oil supplies to the U.S., which resulted in a quadrupling of the oil price. Perhaps these issues ignited a desire to remove these symbols of Saudi friendship from the presidential library. However, when Dr. George Curtis, the assistant director to the library, spoke with media regarding the stolen swords, he said, "Evidently, the thieves went for the most valuable items in the case," implying to the public that the theft was financially motivated. Interestingly, there were many similarities to the only other successful break-in at the Truman Library. Thieves had stolen 444 coins, valued at $50,000 in 1962. It had happened 16 years earlier, but they had used a drill to gain access to the library and had done so in the early morning, between 3 and 4 a.m. Despite these similarities, officials have not linked the events in 1978 with the heist in 1962, and in the 45 years since then, no suspects have been named in either crime. Maybe the swords were melted down immediately and sold off piece by piece, gem by gem. But maybe they're still out there, intact, and part of some aging collector's illicit display. Maybe they'll turn up in an attic or a random estate sale. If they do, and in the meantime, there is still a $10,000 reward for information regarding this case. Submit tips to tips.fbi.gov.